Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome to our Farmy's USP 800 Preparedness Lunch and Learn webinar. If you missed our kickoff webinar last week, no worries at all. We're so glad you're here, and we're excited to continue this series as the road to USP 800 compliance gets closer and closer. We know it can be a confusing process, and we created this webinar to bring conversation and community into this space. So today's webinar is our second of the series, and we'll continue off of our first discussion to hear about where the USP 800 gaps could be in your organization. Thanks again for being here. And now I'll give a little intro for our speakers today. So first is Laura Paxton. She's the CEO of Our Farmy. She's worked in the healthcare industry for 35 years now, and she created Our Farmy alongside her husband, John, following the loss of a family member due to med error. And since then, she's made it her mission to keep patients and healthcare workers safe. We're really excited to hear from her today. Thank you, Laura. And next, I will introduce Charlene. Charlene Kristen is a customer experience specialist with Our Farmy. She has over 30 years of experience as a certified pharmacy technician, 20 of those with the Duke system. And she joined our team in 2020, and we're so excited to learn from her today as well. So before we start, just a little housekeeping. We will have Q&As as we go along and at the end of the presentation. Take a look at the Q&A section in your Zoom toolbar, and please feel free to ask questions at any point. We will get to them. And we'll also have some polling questions throughout, so please make sure to answer those as well. And after the webinar, we will send those questions and answers to all the attendees. So now I'll hand it off to you, Laura.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you everyone for joining us. Just to get started, we're going to do a quick summary of the upcoming webinars that we have. Next week, we're going to be doing a webinar on assessments of risk and actually show you examples of some of the different assessments of risks that we've seen and talk about the different philosophies. Then we'll do a requirements for a drug assessment, creating and updating your hazardous drug list, what we're seeing as best practices, safety information inside the electronic health record, and then when the inspectors come knocking. And then finally on May 25th, we'll do a wrap up where we bring it all to a close, and hopefully everyone who's joined us for this length of time has learned something that's valuable and helpful in your practice. So once again, we started this whole webinar series because we see that there's not a lot of conversation going on around USP 800 and what you all are going through with this task. And we wanted to start a conversation. And we've had the opportunity throughout this period of time of working with clients to see hundreds of hospitals and the way they're approaching this USP 800 challenge. And one thing that we've noticed is that in every single organization, we see that there are gaps in the information that's been compiled. And that is not being critical. There's no way that 1 or 2 or 5, 25 human beings can catch every little thing that's part of this massive mandate. So today we're going to share with you some of the things that Charlene has seen as she's been working with all of our clients and trying to figure out how to help them with this. And one of the things to remember as you look at all of these gaps is you don't know what you don't know. And it's valuable to have a third party look at this and give it an eye. So with that being said, here are some of the gaps that you're going to see. Transport of hazardous drug handling guides. How do people do that? Assessments of risk. The different philosophies on that. We've seen incomplete lists of hazardous drugs. That's so understandable. One of the first questions we got, which was so interesting, what do we do about investigational drugs? Well, once again, you all led us to that answer. And so now we get to share that answer with you. What about disposal? It's not really part of what they list in the whole mandate, but it certainly needs to be included. And then that very important person, the designated person. So with that being said, we are going to move to Charlene and let her share with you some of the things that she's learned. Charlene, I apologize. These slides are jumping on me, so don't let it knock you off. They keep going forwards and backwards. I swear I'm not touching anything.
Okay. Um, Thank you, Laura. Well, the first one that we're going to talk about is hazardous drug handling instructions while in transport. So one thing you want to be aware of, if your pharmacy has an off-site infusion center, you need to keep in mind that you need to maintain that drug temperature during transport. So you might want to consider a thermal sleeve or a thermal bag. This is one of the things that USP 800 talks about in the transport section, and a lot of people don't mention it in their transport SOPs. So just be aware about that drug temperature and maintaining that while it's going to its infusion destination. Dispensed doses should be bagged and labeled. Are gloves required during transport? Yes, unless you have an AOR on file that says differently. And we'll talk more about that. Is there a spill kit readily available? So, you want to think about your staff, those technicians or whoever your delivery person is. If they are going throughout the hospital with hazardous doses using a cart or whatever, you might want to consider keeping a spill kit on that cart. That's just an option. And of course, there's going to be one on the patient floor or the infusion area wherever the dose is being delivered to. But what if something happens along the way? So just something to think about. You have all these spill kits in stock, so might as well throw one in the either the tote that they're carrying or the cart. Next, we'll go on to, does your facility have a pneumatic tube system? Are you tubing group 1 hazardous drugs? Next slide, if you can get there, Laura. Okay. You shouldn't be tubing them unless you have an AOR that stipulates why you're allowing this. For example, unit dosed oral solids, placed in a zipper closing bag prior to putting it in the tube capsule, then that would be a good example of using an AOR for that. Here's an example of how one of our clients has communicated that information to the staff for their anti-neoplastic agents. Does every drug need an AOR? So there tends to be some confusion here. Every potentially hazardous drug needs to be reviewed and classified either by NIOSH or by your designated person for safe handling at your facility. But during this process, I'm not talking about an assessment of risk. An assessment of risk allows for alternative handling or containment strategies outside of the standards in NIOSH Table 5. Does every drug have to have an assessment of risk? No. When is an AOR not allowed? Any HD active pharmaceutical ingredient or any group 1 that requires further manipulation prior to dispensing that product. Those you will not fall into the AOR category. So those you have to treat those with the Table 5 instructions in NIOSH. Any other hazardous drug that your facility allows alternative handling for can be associated with an AOR. That is drug and dosage form specific and stipulates the following: the type of HG, whether or not it's an anti-neoplastic or a non-anti-neoplastic, or you can even state which NIOSH group it's in. So that would cover that section. Then the dosage form, is it a tablet, an oral solution, or even a prepackaged sub-Q injection? The risk of exposure is the risk from skin contact or is it from inhalation? Manipulation allowed? Would you allow crushing or splitting? That that dosage form. So you just need to put in there whether or not that is going to be allowed outside of the pharmacy. If it's inside the pharmacy, you're going to have your own containment strategies in there. Alternative containment strategy for this product, you have to put that on the AOR, and that can be related to PPE required, or we're allowing this product to be compounded in the laminar flow hood as opposed to a BSC, or even the requirement for a CSTD or not, a closed system transfer device or not. In next week's webinar, we'll take a more detailed look into AORs and the different approaches we're seeing. An incomplete list of hazardous drugs. So many times there's tunnel vision, only focusing on what drugs we do carry that are on the NIOSH list. Keep in mind those patients coming in that are already on a therapy or protocol, or maybe even they're registered in a study that consists of hazardous drug that you may or may not be stocking, and therefore it hasn't made it to your hazardous drug list. So of course that patient will continue therapy by utilizing their own supply, or you'll be forced to obtain the drug. And then we need to keep our healthcare workers safe from these unforeseen circumstances. Therefore, our suggestion is to list all the drugs on the NIOSH list at the very least, and then consider doing your own research on those new drugs when they hit the market. Assessing these new drugs is a big undertaking, and it's most often the missed step. The last update to NIOSH was in March of 2022, and more than 15 anti-neoplastic agents alone have hit the market since that time. Not to mention other drugs that are similar in makeup to drugs on the current list. So what goes into consideration for perceiving a drug is hazardous? Carcinogenicity, teratogenicity, or developmental toxicity, reproductive toxicity, organ toxicity at low doses, or genotoxicity. And these are the things that need to be looked at and can sometimes be found in the manufacturer's package insert. However, sometimes with fast-tracked FDA approvals, we're finding that the toxicity information is very limited, and determination may be based on similar therapeutic agents that have already been deemed as hazardous. So you need to think outside the NIOSH box. We've had clients that wanted to create additional groups for flammable drugs and monoclonal antibodies. If safe handling is a concern for any drug in your facility, get the word out there. Carrie, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Charlene. So we've reached our first Q&A, and I've seen 2 questions come in so far, but if anybody has any questions they would like to add, please just look at your Zoom toolbar and ask away. But first question I'm seeing is, what PPE is required for compounding hazardous drugs? Charlene?
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks for the question. For sterile and non-sterile compounding, USP states that a chemotherapy gown, head, hair, and shoe covers, and 2 pair of chemotherapy gloves are required. However, for sterile compounding, that outer glove needs to be sterile.
Okay.
And, just one other thing. I did want to state that so USP states that when you go into the CSEC in the clean room, 2 pairs of shoe covers are required when entering the CSEC, and the outer pair needs to be removed and placed in the trace waste bin when exiting the CSEC.
Okay. Thank you, Charlene. Okay, so the second question is, did you just touch on this one? Or can gowns be reworn during the same day if a compounder leaves the HD compounding area? Or is that different?
Oh, that's different. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. So No, disposable PPE must not be reused. You need to consider all PPE worn when handling HDs to be contaminated. By the way, wanted to let everybody know, in case you were not aware, there is a new chemotherapy rated gown on the market. And the ASTM number for that gown is, and we'll be sending this out, so you'll know it after today, but it's ASTM F 3267-22. And that is, as far as I know, that's the first chemotherapy rated gown that has hit the market. So you might want to consider that. I'm sure it's costly, but it's a good idea.
Thank you,
Okay.
Shirley. Now Shirley's going to keep telling us about the gaps she sees.
Thank you, Laura. So how are you protecting the staff regarding investigational drugs that have not been tested for exposure risk? Well, this is one of the things that are usually left off the facility's HD list. But when they are included, more times than not, they are designated as a group 1 with full 800 containment strategies in place. Once they have made it to the mainstream market, the group designation and handling guides can be updated to reflect new information. Is disposal information, including waste disposal, being communicated? So is your disposal information at the point of care? That's a very big thing, because nurses a lot of times don't know where to find that information. They're used to, so the majority of the drugs they handle are not HDs. So they get in a routine of what they do with waste. So you need to think about, what is the nurse going to do with that bag and tubing from that completed infusion? If they're working in say a hazardous or a chemo infusion area, those nurses are pretty much going to have a routine. They're going to know what to do with that. But if they're working on a floor that occasionally sees this type of situation, they're going to need to know where to go to find that information. So more importantly, what about that dose that was stopped due to the patient having a reaction? That's not trace waste, because it's greater than 3% of the dose. Is the nurse going to drain it down the sink as she would a standard peripheral fluid? Of course not. But you might want to take the guesswork out of it and have the disposal information for that drug at the point of care. So how do we plan for, if or when, more importantly, when, because we all know it's going to happen, that designated person leaves the organization? So you need to think about who is working with that designated person. Don't be left at square one when that person moves on. Having a hazardous drug committee will, at the very least, give you a team of people that have been included in decisions and discussions, and have some knowledge of required regulations and standards. It's also a great idea to have at least one person that works alongside your designated person to cover any gaps that may be seen. And now we'll go to Carrie for a poll.
Thanks, Charlene. So here's our first polling question of today. It should show up on your screen right now. But the question is, how do you and your organization store and maintain hazardous drug information? So we've got spreadsheet, Word document, homegrown database, printed copy, or other. We'd love to hear how you guys are doing this. So please answer the question. I'll give you just a few more seconds so everyone can answer. All right, So everyone should be able to see the results, but it looks like spreadsheet has the most answers. And then we've got Word document and other um, for the other choices. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so here's the next one. Everyone lean forward. Everyone who said spreadsheet, this should make you laugh or cry. I don't know which, but this is the information that we get from our clients. And it's so fascinating because the question I always ask is, how do you keep this up to date? Who keeps this up to date? And how do you really disseminate this to the people who need to see it at the point of care? I mean, that's probably what, a 6-point font on there. So the whole purpose of having this conversation is to discuss how do we take this information that is so very important and compress it and put it in a way that actually is operational and that people can actually use. That's the question. And one thing that Charlene just talked about was that designated person who owns the spreadsheet and has all of the knowledge around the spreadsheet. You need to have more than one person or two people who know where this spreadsheet comes from, because when and if that person leaves, that's a lot of intellectual property for your organization that just walked out the door. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be really hard to resurrect this. This is what we get typically when we start the work with a new client. We get something that looks like this, and that's where Charlene starts. And she starts studying this and getting inside your head and the way you were thinking about it. And from there, she goes back and comes to you and asks you and tells you the gaps that she's found and what they are and what would you like to do about them. It's a very interesting process, because having that third party overlook your information and think through it is very, very helpful. And here we have another poll.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. So our second poll for today is, how do your end users access hazardous handling information? So we've got the EHR, electronic health record, wall chart, printed copy, internet search engine, health system intranet, or other. So the poll should appear on your screen, and please answer. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Okay, all right. This time around, it looks like most users access your HD handling information on the EHR. And then we've also got a health system intranet and an other. Thank you for answering.
And now we have some more questions, Carrie.
Yes. Okay. So I saw 2 questions come in over the course of the presentation, but please, if you have any more questions at all, feel free to ask. And I'll start with the first one. So I see, with your interpretation of USP 797, do you read that a base layer gown needs to be worn under the chemo rated gown? Charlene and Laura?
So I have seen this. I don't remember which site it came from, whether it was on 797 or not. But I do know that in the last USP 800 webinar I attended, that it was mentioned that a chemo rated or a gown that was what do you call it? Basically can't absorb liquid.
Permeable.
Impermeable. Should go over a bunny suit if you're wearing a bunny suit, that you should put that chemo gown over a bunny suit before going into the C-sec. And that chemo gown needs to come off, just like that secondary shoe cover. That chemo gown needs to come off before you exit that C-sec. And so I would think that if you are wearing a base layer gown under that chemo rated gown, that would fall into the same category.
Okay, thanks, Charlene. And then the next question is, does the designated person have to be a pharmacist?
No, it does not have to be a pharmacist. So USP simply states that the designated person must have a thorough understanding of the chapter. So they've studied that chapter, and they need to be able to develop and implement those the procedures that are called out in that chapter. At the same time, they oversee the compliance for the facility where they're at, and need to make sure that they're following all the laws and regulations and any standards to make sure that they have a full competency of the person for the personnel, and ensure environmental control of not only the storage but the compounding area.
Awesome, thank you. So that I didn't see any more questions come in, so I'll hand it off to you, Laura.
Thank you very much. Oh my goodness, y'all have asked excellent questions today. Thank you so very much. And Carrie, thank you for facilitating this. Charlene, oh my goodness, thank you so much for sharing your vast amount of knowledge with us. We're going to recap. These are the upcoming webinars in the next few weeks. Now we're going to go to the page where if you want to sign up for those webinars, you simply take a picture of that QR code and you can sign up for those webinars. I'll tell you something that happened last week that was very interesting. We had a wonderful attendee who sent us a question via email later. And if any of you come up with questions that you'd like to email us later, please do that, because anything that you have questions about that we can find an answer for and share with you, it's just more valuable information for the whole group. So I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank Charlene and Carrie for the great job you've done. And I hope that we get to see y'all again next week. And I hope you're learning something valuable here. So anyhow, thanks so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And hopefully we'll talk to you again next week. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.